I've been in the technology sector a little over 30 years now, and what I've seen over the past 30 years is nothing like what it started to where it is now or to where it's going. So to tell you about my career, a lot of it is like a history story. A lot of it's not all that important or interesting compared to what's going on in the current tech today. But like so many things that I say, where we came from is extremely important to where we are, because that's the journey through which we've learned the lessons. So I would say the main thing about 30 years in my career is that I've learned an awful lot of what's wrong and an awful lot of what's right, and a lot of different lessons in between, and I've fortunately learned the difference between the two of them. Over those 30 years, I've been involved in a vast amount of projects in both public sector and private sector across different industries, and from local to international in many different locations. And the one underlying thread that I could see through all of it is that I've learned that the technology is meant to be put into place and the money spent only to deliver value to the business. Technology is either to solve a problem, to prevent a problem from happening, to save money, reduce costs, or to deliver additional money and additional services. And if your technology is not going in for any of those specific reasons, then you need to reconsider what you're doing, and you need to reconsider the investment, and you need to reconsider if that is where the time, effort, and money are best spent. I've learned over these 30 years far too often that that's not the case. I've seen governments waste massive amounts of money on programs. I've seen companies go in and do things the wrong way, and they're doing it the wrong way because they don't want to be seen to do it the wrong way. And the funny thing about technology is it works or it doesn't work. It's a 0 and a 1, and we have an awful lot more ability to finally quantify whether something works or not, and as well as how much it's cost and how long it's taken. And more often than not, it's not planned well and it's delivered poorly. In fact, if you take a look at the history of software projects being developed, the vast amount are late, the vast amount are over budget, and the vast amount don't get done the way that they were meant to be done. That's probably not where technology should be taking us. It's going very fast, but I don't think it's necessarily going that much faster than it ever was. And in fact, a lot of things have slowed down because of the overall crushing pressure of the financial situation on the markets across the world. So while you have an awful lot more startups in the past few months, you have an awful lot less startups actually getting funded, right? The road from money to delivering a product is a lot longer than it is. I see probably the balance and the biggest shift going, that those borders are more gray than they ever used to be. There's more overlap. You don't have a difference between organization and technology, because it used to be that technology enabled an organization to deliver whatever that organization was meant to do. Today, the organization can't do it without technology. The infrastructure of an organization used to be people. Now it's people and wires and tin. Well, that's a difficult question, because I've been changing my career focus over the past 6 months. I've moved from working primarily on full-time engagements, whether they're contracts or jobs, where I'm involved in something full and deep, completely ensconced for a set period of time. And I've moved now into working into a more of an advisory role with multiple businesses, working from a different approach altogether. Some of these are paying customers. A lot of the time I'm working with startups in a mentoring type of capacity, where I can afford the time to be able to do that, partly because I get energy that helps make the rest of my life and my business go forward, and partly because I'm looking for opportunities as I go all along the way. And most of the opportunities that I see are the people more than the ideas. And it's the people who you can grow and from whom you can harvest great things. Disruptive is a word that's a very good word when it's applied in a certain way that's making a disruptive difference to improve things, whereas we also have lots of disruptions that are more like the traditional sense of the word, where you're actually disrupting things and making it not appear to be so good. I think that the big picture, and in terms of acceleration, is probably overstated. I don't think that we need to look at businesses today and technology today being that different than it was, because we are still accomplishing goals. We're still planning and trying to reach the visionary target, and the mission of the business is to get there. So I don't know that it's necessarily so different than it was. And I believe that the clever businesses can use technology to change how they're doing things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'd say that it is any faster. I think what technology can actually allow people to do is to be smarter. So the old adage of work hard, work smart instead, I think really applies to the application of technology, because again, going back to my earlier example about late projects and overrun budgets, there are so many times when the wrong things are done and the wrong focus is in place. It may be that somebody's got a fetish for a new technology. It may be that an organization feels that they have somebody driving them to move to cloud, and it may be a good move, but they need to plan. They need to take a look at where they are. They need to assess the return on investment of what they've done before they start looking at the potential value that the future technology is going to apply to them. So the big picture needs to include the old picture and the new picture. And if you're only looking at it from a certain angle, or if you don't take the pulled back perspective where you, rather than being at grass and tree level, you pull back to a helicopter or to a satellite, and you can see a little bit broader view of what's on the path, and you can start to do a little bit more predictive analysis about what are the things that are going to stop you from getting there. And those are the milestones that either mark your progress or that mark where you're stalled, are the things that you need to focus on. And you need to prioritize these and replan these and assess the steps as you go along the way. To do with big data is to stop people talking about big data, right? I mean, big data is a relative thing. If you've got a 3-person business and you've got 100 records to go through and it's going to take you a day each, maybe that's big data for you, whereas big data for somebody else might be the same thing times a trillion. So it's a relative term, and it's like everything else in the computer business, like everything to do with the technology, the 4 points that I said earlier, you're saving money, you're solving problems, that set of stuff, that's what big data is there to do. What value can you extract from it, or what problems can you solve with it? And it's really not big data, it's subsets of data within it that you can actually start to extract value from. You need to be able to dispense with the things that are in their way, filter them out. And the problem with big data is that it's big, right? And by big, we mean bigger than a database can typically manage, or bigger than a standard approach to databases can typically manage. So what I really think that you need to do is find out what it is from the big data that you need to extract, what is the value that you're looking for, and then figure out your organization how to get at the right data, and figure out which data you can dispense with, and also determine quite safely whether that's legal to dispense with it or not. And if it's not, then start categorizing things, start shading your data into different colors, and then look at the different focuses, because from those different angles and the different perspective, it will mean different things to different parts of the business. You can learn lessons from big data, and you can learn how not to do things, and you can learn how you should do things. The problem with big data today, all people are really doing is what they call ELT, which is extract, load, and transform, which means find the data that you're looking for, load it into a mechanism where you can look more closely at either your traditional database or typically these days Hadoop, and figure out exactly how you can transform it and extract and derive value from it. That's the question, that's the critical thing. And if you've got a bunch of ponytail technologists playing with Hadoop and doing things for the sake of technology being cool, as opposed to extracting and bringing in the business people who say what they want the data for, what are they going to do with it, where are they going to deliver the value. And this goes back to one of my major bugbears about technology in general. It's not two different camps. You are a team. You need to be working together. Just because technology doesn't understand the business requirement and the business people don't understand the technical complexities, that's because they're speaking the incorrect language. They need to translate, they need to come to a common ground, and they need to actually communicate and be on the same page. One of the first things that I think needs to happen with cloud is that we need to turn down the volume on the hype. I believe that there's far too many people expecting far too many things. They're looking at cloud as a panacea, and first of all, cloud is not new. This is just another way to describe a technology and a method of delivering services that we used to do for many different years. We've been calling it cloud for more than 20 years, but any hosted environment where I am providing services to you without you buying the equipment, or with you buying the equipment but me storing it and managing it in my facilities, these are essentially iterations of how cloud is. So what we're really looking at doing is changing the way that the technology is being delivered, and the reality is it's a commercial model. You are turning computing and communications and storage into a utility model like your water, electricity, and gas at home. You turn it on, you get what you need, and you turn it off. That's a little oversimplified, but you can essentially turn on the tap and create another development environment or create a test environment. You can do things more experimentally without having very expensive equipment. You can have a model that is, as you turn on the tap, it's available. You can have other models where you are paying for things on a longer term basis. But the critical aspect is you don't have barriers of spending money to get started. Now, that's not always the case, and it's not always available. And the thing that we need to remember about cloud is that it's not a single panacea, it's not a simple answer to everything for everybody. Private cloud versus public cloud. I'm reading articles that are talking about cloud will be where all businesses go, that all banks and all government offices need to go to the public cloud because they'll save money. The problem is the requirements are, again, going to be driving it. And if you go through pretty much every answer that I'll have to any question you ask me, it will come back to requirements. What are you trying to accomplish, and what is the best, most facile, most intelligent way to apply technology to solve that problem? And if it happens to be cloud, because that's giving you a model that works for you, that's great. But if that security requirement that you have requires it to be in private space where it can't be interrupted, if it requires things to be highly protected, then you need to look at it in an entirely different manner. So when we have people, the pundits, the journalists, talking about cloud being the answer for everything, I'm a little bit concerned because they're actually providing people with the wrong answers. We have the European Union talking about how the cloud is a panacea, essentially, that's going to solve every problem. The digital commissioner for the EU, Nelly Cruz, has gone on the record as saying that everything that you put in the cloud is safe. It's just like a private little locker with your private little key. I'm very frustrated by this because it's sending a completely incorrect message from completely unqualified people to people who will believe it. And when you turn around and you look at Amazon's problems, or you take a look at the RBS problems, these are cloud things that needed to get fixed. RBS, industrial strength, where massive amounts of money are being paid for redundant systems, their problem was a little bit different than Amazon's problem. And you'll notice that Amazon.com did not go down when Amazon Web Services went down, because they're paying for a different type of a premium service. So cloud can solve the problems, but the £2.99 per month for all you can eat cloud is never going to give you backup services, it's never going to give you resiliency, it's never going to give you additional coverage, and it's not going to give you somebody on the end of a phone who can answer your questions. If you don't need those things, great. If you do, that's not the right answer. So again, the bottom line, the simple lowest common denominator for anything you're going to do with technology is what is the problem that you need to solve. And in the case of getting into government and everything else, what are the regulations? What are the compliance issues? How do you need to deal with these things? And can your data reside in America in Amazon's cloud services? If it can legally, that's great. But if it can't, then you better not put it there. You need to answer these questions, because you who are putting the data there are the one legally responsible for it. Those are very broad and different topics, right? I believe cloud is a technology method to help to deliver better, stronger, faster, cheaper capabilities to the business, whereas social media will take advantage of the technology of cloud to reach their clients and customers in a different type of a way. I actually don't call it social media much anymore. I call it media, because it's all the same thing, and those who don't realize it won't be in the business long enough for that to matter. I mean, social business isn't something that's new. It's a tag that we've laid on it differently, and it's a technologies that we're applying to it the same that we are to other businesses. I'm all for society getting back to where it was. I grew up in a very different world than we have now than we had in the 60s. And I miss some of the old stuff, and I love some of the new stuff, and I think that we can have a clever way to make a hybrid. And I personally believe that the habits and the characteristics that things like Facebook and Twitter and all of the other social medias are bringing back to the society are things that have been missing over those and have disappeared over the 70s, 80s, 90s. So bringing this back is another way to connect society, and I think essentially it's one of the ways that we can re-engineer it. Now, that said, when I talk with social businesses and social enterprises and I see what they're doing, I'm quite interested in how they can come up with a profit model to make themselves sustainable, because frankly, that's the only way the business works. And if you can come up with a model that works like that. Now, if I translate that into the startup space, there's a few local entrepreneurs that I've been speaking with, and a couple of them are very socially focused and very socially orientated. And the problem with that is their business plan calls for half of their profits to go back into the charities that they want to work with, or to deliver different benefits to people. And that's really great. Definitely a target where we would like businesses to be going. However, when that entrepreneur starts talking to the business investor, he's not going to be necessarily interested. So you need to have a balance. If you can come up with a way to have a profitable social enterprise that is able to give things back. So I'm thinking it's a hybrid. And I personally believe that most of the businesses that we deal with should be more social than they are, rather than creating businesses that are completely social. And I think the technology and awareness and the current battle right now between social enterprise around the world and Mark Benioff of Salesforce.com, who's trying to copyright the term social enterprise for commercial purposes. And in direct discussions with him myself, he's telling us that he coined that phrase himself, which I don't believe is the case. And he's telling us that it's not meant to differentiate or to stop the social enterprises that are real social enterprises from using the term. However, I'm not convinced that it's a good thing. I would rather see Salesforce and Benioff copyright the term and then give it back to the world rather than use it themselves. So if they're going to lock the term up, it would be better to lock it up and not use it, because it's not that people are going to confuse a charity with a corporation, but in the days of green, when everybody was starting to sell organic before they legislated the term green, then you were very much misled by people trying to tell you that their products were very green or their products were very organic, or that their businesses were environmentally friendly. We have legislation around that to now the false claims can't be made. I think that we're going to have to get into that space for the social enterprise if this continues, because otherwise you're misleading the public. Take that as two separate questions. If I take a look at Oracle and Google and the open source battle, I'm going to typically err on my own side of caution and say Google's right and Oracle's not. And that's because I know how Google gives much away, and I know Oracle is pure for-profit and nothing else. Now, don't misunderstand me. Google's not there as a charity. They're certainly not a social enterprise. But they are a company that has a very different view of the original hacker ethic that I'm a big proponent of. I've been involved with open source and Unix and Unix International systems back in the 80s and 90s, and we had a huge amount of problems then. And if we take a look today at something like Linux, Linux is an open environment. It's a nice version of Unix that's available for everybody to use. Then we have a bunch of different flavors of the different companies, and each time you take something open and you put a company label on it, and the company does some additions or modifications or adjustments and some add-ons, you no longer have an open environment. You no longer have an open space that is going to be the same across different platforms. And the entire purpose of open was to be able to be portable and to be more simply applying the technology across a different set of requirements. That was really said. So the whole idea of open was that it was meant to be a cheaper approach, and it was meant to be platform agnostic so that you could work on multiple platforms, and that the people, the end users, the companies, the businesses, the governments that were using these products would be able to do, again, my favorite phrase, better, stronger, faster, cheaper. When you start to get a company involved in an open environment like Oracle or HP Linux or IBM's Linux flavors, what have you, you start to change the model, you start to make it closed. It's no longer the same. It's not, if there's an IBM extension to Linux, then that will be available on IBM equipment only. If there's an extension to Linux for a Macintosh, it will be available on the Macintosh only, and you're no longer working at a nice core. Another big problem that we have with that type of open is clearly illustrated in the problems between the different handsets and environments, iOS, Android, Microsoft, etc. Nothing is portable, and then we start to get the patent issues, and we'll come back to the Samsung in a moment. The issue that we have then is that you've got a bunch of companies making money rather than delivering products. So if you take LinkedIn's application for iPad and Android, they've used a very large base of HTML5 code. So there's a very thin layer across the top that needs to be customized for the different devices. I think that makes an awful lot more sense. I think it's a lot more clever because it allows you to have a focused development team and only splinters to do the specific things that need to be done. And you can even potentially outsource the device-specific technology aspects and keep the main core of the work for yourself. The lessons that we learned from Unix International and open Unix systems back in the 80s and 90s are, as I was saying earlier, lessons that we should have been paying better attention to. They're the types of things that I believe we've learned an awful lot more than we've actually put into practice. And the reason that is because everybody wants to make money. And I guess, the reality of the world is when we're talking about earlier about the social enterprises, they need to make money as well. The businesses are all there for profit for the shareholders. So it's a completely different argument. But when you come to companies like Oracle and Google, it's almost like, but it comes to a point where you've got Google looks like they're wearing the white hat and Oracle looks like they're wearing the black hat. Oracle doesn't want to be in the space where they're perceived that way, and Oracle are working towards making arrangements to have everything work out. But when companies start to buy and license and change open source into different flavors, that's okay, just stop calling it open, because it's no longer open. It's no longer the same flavor. And I think that if you were to talk to Linus about what he created in the first place, I think his perspective of Linux is very different, than his vision rather is very different than where it's ended up. I think, for example, if you were to talk to Linus about his original vision and objectives for Linux, I think it's going to be very different than where it actually is today. Now, the gentleman has turned into a very profitable business for himself, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if you take a look at other systems like Drupal is now becoming a commercially available product as opposed to purely a free product. And sorry, but that makes sense because you can't continue to pump out great quality stuff for free. Right? You have to have a way to make money, otherwise it's going to fail and people are going to be looking for something that's different. And the other aspect of that I think is really critical for the people that are delivering these products, if you're going to deliver something that's free, that won't be free later, I suggest you tell people now, you lay out the roadmap, you let people know what to expect, and then you don't get into situations like Twitter, getting the backlash from users and from partners. You don't have a situation where people have invested huge amounts of time and money, granted, into somebody else's data stream and somebody else's IP and somebody else's work, but with the impression that that was something that they would be able to do. So I'm firmly believing that Twitter can do as they please. I just think that if you manage it better, you're going to get better press and you're going to have better relationships in the long run. I'm going to answer that one primarily from my own experience with my own startup, and the reason that I was able to secure funding was the ability to clearly describe what the product was going to do, clearly describe the value for that, have a indication of where it fits into the market, why it fits into the market, as well as a clear path to how the product is going to make money. You're not going to get an awful lot of investors that will invest in a great idea. You're not going to get an awful lot of investors that are going to go for a product like Facebook where they don't have a complete idea of what the monetary paths are. And I think one of the big stumbling blocks for a lot of these businesses is that they have, as my mother would have said, eyes too big for their stomachs, right? They think that by saying they're going to get 0.1% of this £41 billion market, that's going to sound like a lot of money. But what they really need to have in their business plan is how they're going to get that piece of the market. Rather than talk about the profits that the company is going to be making when they've reached that piece of the market, they need to show clearly what are those paths. And they need to have typically a monetization path that involves more than advertising. The advertising route is, I think, fraught with mystery and fear and lots of uncertainty. You can never be particularly certain what is going to work. And I think if you take a look at a company like, I don't know, small one, a few people have heard of, called Facebook, whose IPO has gone from here to here. They're less than half of what they were when they went to market, and the huge reason for this is that they don't have the ways to generate money. They don't have a product. They've spent $1 billion on Instagram, which is absolutely clearly no way to make money as it stands right now. They have advertising as their primary path, and I think that the market's a little bit concerned about that because the advertising doesn't seem to generate that type of money. It's a very different type of a model than that Google has. So you're bringing people to Google to give them information and send them someplace else where they can ultimately spend money, which is how the Google circle works. Whereas with Facebook, you're trying to keep them in your environment. So inside of Facebook, you have games like the Zynga Farmville where you can buy things that don't exist with money that does. I don't think that that's a really good idea for a business model in the long run, because I suspect that overall, over time, that model is not going to be all that interesting to people. If it were, Zynga wouldn't have lost all of the money that they lost. And if it were, Zynga wouldn't be worrying about turning their poker game into a cash money poker game rather than a play money poker game, because that's something that they can make vast amounts of money on. It also changes their positioning and their placement in the market, and it changes an awful lot, I think, of what people think of the company as well. And if that's not important, then that's fine. But if it's there's a lot of people who don't approve of gambling. There's a lot of people who don't want to be involved in businesses of that nature. So if that's the route that you're going to go, you have to take a look at where that's going to potentially change your market along the way. So again, it all comes back to one change makes one adjustment here, and another change over here brings something up from the bottom. And if you can't look at this business model the way that you can look at a chess game and actually predict outcomes that are going to happen in advance, or at least forecast them in advance to the way that the bloke sitting across the table with the checkbook can understand, then your startup isn't really going to start. I'm going to break the startup world into two spaces to start with, because there's a lot of businesses that are not technology based, right? If you're starting a store or a service or an organization where you need to bring in resources, people, things, the barriers to starting that type of business is the same as they were last month or last year or 10 years ago. The technology that they need to run their business, which they didn't necessarily need 10 or 20 years ago, can be available a lot more cheaply, just like it can for the technology startups. So the real change in the startup focus and the startup world, I think, is a lot more in the technology space, because cloud, ubiquitous networks, cheap storage, has raised the ability for startups that are technology based to just start doing things. All they need is a laptop. They need a PC or a Mac, and they connect into a cloud server somewhere where it's running everything that they need. They don't have to buy systems, they don't have to buy and license software and development environments. And if they bring in a couple of new people, they can just spin up a new environment and take it down. Done deal. As opposed to if you needed a new development environment for a few weeks before, you'd have to go out, buy equipment, build equipment, install software, license software, pay for it. So very, very different type of a space. Now, in terms of that business world and the startup world, they're all the same place, right? We are looking at a market with a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of money, and everybody's trying to get a piece of it. So if a startup is delivering a similar service to an existing business, they're just a new piece of competition. And I think startups are small, and people are a little bit more interested in working with small people or small businesses because they have the ability to try to trust them more. They have the ability to feel like they're making a difference in something, as opposed to just buying from the big corporate entity. But that's not always of use or value or interest to some other people. So I think, like an earlier answer that I had, it's not a left or a right or an extreme on either end. We're looking back at a hybrid. The breeding ground for startups is a very interesting place, because most of these technology startups need technology resources. And again and again, I'm coming across startups in the London area that are looking for technical co-founders. This is because they've got a couple of very clever guys who come up with a couple of very clever ideas, and they want to have it built, and they want to bring in a technology bloke to do it. The difference is the technology resources are people that have a trade that they can go to the open market and be paid a bunch of money to deliver it. So to have an entrepreneurial technology person who hasn't come up with his own idea, that's what a non-technical founder needs to find, and that's a little bit more tricky, because the technology bloke who hasn't got his own idea or lady, and there's not enough of them, they are working in the business sector where they've got a career path. They have a clear set of goals. They know that they can learn these things, they can move up, they can advance, and they can get to a certain point as they go through their career, where they can double, triple, whatever their salary, right? Whereas when you're in a startup, you're taking a risk. Now, there's an old adage that I've seen a lot lately. It's about entrepreneurs work the way that they work and live the way that they live for a short period of time so that they can, which other people don't want to do, so that they can end up living a life that other people can't do. The only difference, that what's missing from that, is that they're taking a risk to do that. And if that's what you are and that's how you think, that's not necessarily the same as the person who's got the technology trait. Right? So you need to somehow marry these groups together, and then you need to find the opportunity. And if your idea is brilliant and you have no way to build it, you may not ever be able to build it. So you need to start to understand. There's something Seth Godin called the dip, which is the point where you come down, and at this point you either, the only way is up, is what some people say. Well, Seth says the other way is out. So you need to make the call at the right point. And if you've gone to a certain point and you aren't able to go any further, and you're spinning your wheels, and the different angles and the different approaches that you're taking aren't making a difference, it's possible that it's not ever going to make a difference. So I think people have to be a little more ready to do what William Goldman, the American screenwriter, said, and you have to kill your darlings. He was talking about writing screenplays, and sometimes the favorite character or the favorite scene or the favorite line ends up either out of the script altogether or on the cutting room floor because it no longer fits the end product. So you need to be able to do that. Sometimes that means all the films on the cutting room floor and you've just shelved it. Other times you've done what we affectionately these days call a pivot, and you've realized that your product could work in a slightly different space than it did before.